At first I thought it was some cruel joke. But then, 6 words whispered to me by someone at the funeral turned everything upside down. My name is Daniel. I grew up in a quiet American town where my grandfather, Richard Hale, was practically a legend. People called him the Steel King because decades ago he built a massive fortune in construction, shipping, and real estate. His name was on buildings, schools, even parks. To most people, he was a hero. To me, though, he was complicated. You see, Grandpa Richard wasn't the warm, gentle type. He was cold, demanding, and he expected perfection. As a kid, I never measured up to his standards. My cousins were the golden ones, straight A students, polished, ambitious. I was different. I wanted to write, travel, and live life outside of his empire. He saw that as weakness, and for years he barely spoke to me, but still he was family. And when he passed away at the age of 87, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd left a part of his fortune to me too. The funeral was massive. Reporters stood outside the church whispering about his billions. My cousins arrived in luxury cars, stepping out like celebrities. I showed up in my beat-up old truck, the only thing I could afford after years of trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. People weren't there just to mourn. They were waiting for the will. The entire service felt like a performance, as though grief was just a mask for greed. I sat in the back row feeling like I didn't belong. After the ceremony, we were escorted to my grandfather's grand estate. The mansion was everything you'd imagine. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, endless hallways lined with oil paintings. In the center of the library, the lawyer sat at a long table with a thick envelope. My heart raced as he began to read. The words fell like thunder. To my eldest granddaughter, Emma, he left $20 million in shares in the family company. Applause, tears, relief. To my cousin James, he left another $20 million, plus one of his vacation homes in Miami. Cheers, smiles. To the rest of them, properties, cars, jewelry, stocks. And then came my name. To my grandson, Daniel Hale. The lawyer paused. Everyone leaned in. I braced myself. I leave a plane ticket, one way. That was it. A ticket inside a plain white envelope. No mansion, no car, not even $1. Just a ticket. The room erupted in whispers and laughter. My cousins smirked. Some even chuckled under their breath. Emma leaned close and muttered, "Guess he thought you'd be better off far away." I sat frozen, the envelope heavy in my hand. My face burned with shame. A plane ticket? Why? What did it mean? That's when it happened. As people gathered around celebrating their inheritance, a frail old man who had worked for my grandfather for decades walked past me. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, and said 6 words that made my blood run cold. Find what he hid from them. I looked up, startled, but the man was already gone, swallowed by the crowd. My heart pounded. Find what he hid from them? Who was them? What had my grandfather hidden? And why was I the one he chose to leave this mystery to? The plane ticket suddenly felt less like an insult and more like a clue. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments about which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy the story. I slipped the envelope into my pocket, ignoring the mocking stares of my cousins. Whatever my grandfather had left behind, I knew one thing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The night after the will reading, I couldn't sleep. My cousins were probably celebrating, raising champagne glasses in the mansion, while I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the single envelope on my kitchen table. The plane ticket was old-fashioned, printed on thick paper, not digital. It was for a one-way flight to Denver, Colorado, leaving in 3 days. No explanation, no instructions, just my name and the destination. Denver. Why there? I had never been to Colorado, and as far as I knew, my grandfather didn't have any businesses there. His empire stretched from New York to Miami, Los Angeles to Chicago. But Denver? It didn't make sense. And yet, those 6 words from the old employee wouldn't leave my mind. Find what he hid from them. Was Denver the key? I flipped the envelope over and noticed something odd. On the inside flap, barely visible, were faint pencil marks. They weren't words, more like scratches, as if someone had started writing and erased it. I held it under the light, tilting the paper, and slowly the marks revealed themselves. A series of numbers. March 17th, 2024. A date? A code? My hands trembled as I traced it. What had my grandfather left me? And why in secret? The next morning, I went back to the estate, hoping to find the old man who whispered to me. But he was gone. When I asked the staff about him, they shrugged. One woman told me he'd retired months ago and wasn't supposed to be there at all. That only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, my cousins weren't done mocking me. Emma called that afternoon, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, Daniel, how's the glamorous life of a ticket holder? Planning your big trip?" I hung up without answering, but inside, anger burned. They thought I was nothing. They thought Grandpa had written me off completely. But what if they were wrong? I kept going over my childhood memories, searching for clues. Most of them weren't pleasant, harsh lectures, long silences, but one stood out. When I was 12, I spent a summer at Grandpa's house. One night, he took me into his study, where he kept a massive globe on his desk. He spun it slowly, pointed to the Rocky Mountains, and said, "The world is full of treasures, Daniel. Some are hidden where people least expect." At the time, I thought it was just one of his strange lectures. But now, it felt like a message. That evening, I looked up Denver on a map. My heart skipped when I noticed something. Coordinates near the city lined up with the numbers I'd found inside the envelope. 3-17-24 wasn't just a date. It was longitude and latitude. Grandpa had left me more than a ticket. He had left me a map. But a map to what? The thought of going terrified me. What if it was nothing? What if it was just another way for him to laugh at me from the grave? But then again, what if it was everything? The next 2 days were restless. I packed a small bag, barely slept, and avoided my cousins, who were too busy giving interviews to the media about continuing Grandpa's legacy. They didn't know I had my own legacy to uncover. Finally, the morning of the flight came. The airport was crowded, but I moved like I was in a dream, clutching my ticket. At the gate, doubt filled me. Was I walking into a trap? Into nothing? But when I boarded and the plane lifted off, a strange sense of calm washed over me. As the city disappeared below, I thought of those 6 words again. Find what he hid from them. Who were them? My cousins? The media? The world? When we landed in Denver, the air was sharp and cold. I grabbed a rental car and drove toward the coordinates I had matched on the map. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they hurt. The Rocky Mountains rose in the distance, massive and silent, like guardians holding back secrets. I followed the road until it narrowed into winding paths. Hours passed. Finally, I pulled over near a small abandoned cabin deep in the woods. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. My heart pounded as I stepped out, the wind howling around me. Was this what the ticket was for? A forgotten cabin in the mountains? The door creaked open easily, and inside the smell of dust and old wood hit me. The floorboards groaned under my feet. There was nothing. Just broken furniture, a rusted stove, and shadows. But then, in the far corner, under a pile of boards, I saw something. A locked chest. And suddenly, I knew. This was only the beginning. The locked chest sat in front of me like it was waiting, heavy, iron-bound, covered in dust. My pulse quickened as I knelt beside it. The metal lock was old, rusted, but solid. I tugged at it. No luck. I searched the cabin, checking drawers, under loose floorboards, even inside the stove. Nothing. Whoever had hidden this chest didn't want it to be opened easily. For a moment, frustration consumed me. I thought about smashing the lock with a rock, but something inside me hesitated. My grandfather never did anything without purpose. If he left this for me, there had to be a key. That's when I noticed the painting. It hung crooked on the wall, half faded from age, a mountain scene. But the brush strokes looked familiar. I leaned closer and saw tiny letters painted in the bottom corner. R.H. Richard Hale, my grandfather. He'd painted this. Behind the frame, taped to the back, was a small envelope. Inside, a key. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock. The metal creaked, resisted, then finally snapped open. The chest groaned as I lifted the lid, dust swirling in the air. Inside were stacks of old notebooks, photographs, and a leather-bound journal with my grandfather's initials carved into the cover. Beneath those, wrapped in cloth, something heavier. I pulled the cloth back. It wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It was a gun. My throat tightened. Why would my grandfather leave me a weapon? What kind of secret had he been hiding? I pushed it aside and opened the journal. The first page was filled with neat handwriting, but not the words of a businessman. These were confessions. Money can build empires, but it also builds enemies. Trust no one. They smile at the table but sharpen knives behind your back. If you are reading this, Daniel, it means you are the only one I trusted enough to know the truth. I froze. Trusted me? The same man who ignored me my whole life? I turned the page. He wrote about secret meetings, shady business partners, and threats from people who once worked with him. He spoke of the family not being ready to know everything, and again, those 6 words appeared in the journal. Find what I hid from them. But what exactly had he hidden? One photograph slipped out from between the pages. It showed my grandfather, much younger, standing with 3 men in suits in front of a construction site. The men weren't smiling. Their faces looked cold, dangerous. On the back of the photo, in my grandfather's handwriting, was a single name, Carver. The name meant nothing to me, but the way it was written, with heavy strokes, almost carved into the paper, made my stomach twist. I dug deeper into the chest. More photos, more documents. Some looked like legal papers, others, bank ledgers with huge amounts of money transferred overseas. My grandfather hadn't just been wealthy, he'd been hiding something massive. Then I found another envelope, smaller, sealed with red wax. I broke it open. Inside was a second plane ticket. This one wasn't to Denver. It was to New Orleans. Why New Orleans? The journal mentioned it too. A short entry, almost cryptic. Denver is where the truth begins. New Orleans is where it ends. My head spun. What truth? What ending? Suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone in the cabin. The air shifted, the floor creaked, and for a moment I swore I heard footsteps outside. My chest tightened. I stuffed everything back into the chest, grabbed the journal and photos, and slipped out the back door. The forest was silent, but too silent, like it was holding its breath. I hurried to the car, every shadow now a threat. Were my cousins following me? The media? Or worse, the men my grandfather had written about? As I drove down the winding road, I couldn't stop replaying his words. Trust no one. That night in a cheap motel, I read more of the journal. And slowly, the pieces began to fit together. My grandfather hadn't left me out of his fortune because he hated me. He had left me out to protect me. The millions my cousins received weren't a gift, they were a trap. And now, the real danger was only beginning. The second plane ticket sat on the motel nightstand, staring at me like a challenge. New Orleans. The words in my grandfather's journal echoed in my head. Denver is where the truth begins. New Orleans is where it ends. Sleep was impossible. Every sound outside my motel room made me jump. A car door slamming, footsteps in the hall, a shadow moving under the streetlight. Was someone watching me? By dawn, I couldn't wait any longer. I packed the journal, the photographs, and the envelope of documents into my backpack. I left the gun behind, but part of me regretted it immediately. If my grandfather was right about enemies, I might need it. At the airport, I tried to look calm, but my eyes scanned every face. A man in a gray suit lingered near the gate. A woman kept glancing at me from across the waiting area. Were they just travelers? Or something else? When I boarded the plane, my seat was near the back. The man in the suit sat 2 rows ahead. He didn't look at me, but I felt his awareness like a weight pressing down. The flight to New Orleans felt endless. My mind kept spinning around the name I'd found in the photo. Carver. Who was he? A business rival? A criminal? Someone my grandfather had betrayed? When the plane landed, the man in the suit stood quickly, grabbed his bag, and disappeared into the crowd. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe. New Orleans was a storm of noise and heat. Jazz music spilled from bars, tourists crowded the streets, but underneath the charm was something darker. I felt it the second I stepped outside. I checked into a small inn on the edge of the French Quarter. That night, I opened the journal again, hunting for more clues. Near the back, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a folded sheet of paper tucked between the pages. It was a hand-drawn map, not of Denver, not of New Orleans as a whole, but of one neighborhood, marked with an X. Next to it, in my grandfather's handwriting, were 2 words, the vault. My stomach flipped. A vault? Did he mean a bank? A safe house? I traced the streets on the map, then compared them with a city guide. The X lined up with an old warehouse near the river. I didn't wait until morning. Curiosity overpowered fear. The streets grew quieter as I approached the warehouse. Streetlights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. The building loomed in front of me, rusted metal doors, broken windows, the smell of river water and rot. Inside, the air was damp, thick with dust. Rats scurried in the corners. My flashlight shook as I swept it across the floor. At the far end, hidden behind stacks of rotting crates, was a steel door. It looked out of place, newer, stronger, and sealed with a keypad. Above it, faint letters had been scratched into the metal. R.H., my grandfather's initials. I swallowed hard. This was it. The vault. But I didn't know the code. I pulled out the journal, flipping through the pages. Dates, names, warnings, nothing obvious. Then I remembered the numbers I'd first found on the plane ticket envelope. 3-17-24. I typed them in. The keypad beeped. The lock clicked. The door swung open slowly, groaning on its hinges. Inside was a narrow room lined with safety deposit boxes, shelves, and stacks of folders. At the center sat a single table, and on it, a thick, sealed envelope with my name written in bold letters, Daniel. My breath caught. Hands trembling, I reached for it, but froze. Behind me, the steel door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I spun around, my flashlight shaking across the empty room. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the silence that followed. I wasn't alone. A shadow moved against the wall. Slow, deliberate. Someone else was in the vault with me. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about survival. The shadow moved again, stretching across the vault wall like a phantom. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice unsteady. For a moment, silence. Then footsteps echoed slowly and steady. From the far corner, a figure stepped into the light. It wasn't a stranger. It was my cousin, James. He smirked when he saw the envelope on the table with my name. "I knew it," he said. "I knew Grandpa left something for you." "Something bigger than what we got." My stomach dropped. "You followed me?" He shrugged. "You were always too easy to read." "Denver, New Orleans. You think no one noticed? I've been 2 steps behind you the whole time." The anger in his eyes chilled me. "All of us got money," he continued, "but money fades. Power doesn't. Grandpa's real legacy is in this vault, and I'm not letting you keep it." He took a step closer. My hand brushed against the journal in my bag. My grandfather's words echoed again. Trust no one. James, you don't understand, I said, stalling, my voice shaking. This isn't about wealth. It's about something dangerous. He warned me. James laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Dangerous? Don't be naive. This is opportunity. Whatever secrets he kept, we'll use them. You were always the weak one, Daniel, always the outsider. But not anymore. He lunged for the envelope. Instinct took over. I grabbed it first and shoved it into my bag. James snarled, grabbing my arm. We struggled, crashing into the shelves, papers flying everywhere. A folder burst open, spilling documents across the floor. Lists of names, coded transactions, offshore accounts. James's eyes widened. My God, this is billions. He shoved me hard against the wall, my vision blurring from the impact. His hands clawed at my bag. Desperate, I remembered the gun I'd left behind in Denver. Regret stabbed through me. But then, something else. My flashlight beam caught a metal rod leaning against the corner. I grabbed it, swung it, and knocked James backward. He fell, gasping, blood trickling from his forehead. For a moment, I thought he'd stop, but his eyes burned with fury as he staggered back to his feet. Then his words cut through the silence. Grandpa trusted you because he knew you'd lead me here. He knew I'd take what he left. He always loved me more, Daniel. You were just the bait. The words rattled me. Was he right? Had my grandfather manipulated me even from the grave? James lunged again. In the struggle, we hit the steel door release, and with a loud clunk it opened. The cold night air rushed in. For a split second, freedom was inches away. I shoved past him, clutching the bag. He tried to grab me again, but I twisted freely, sprinting out of the vault into the empty warehouse. My lungs burned as I ran through the darkness, James's footsteps echoing behind me. I burst into the street, flagging down the first cab I saw. The driver barely glanced at me as I threw myself inside, gasping, "Drive!" Only when the warehouse disappeared in the rearview mirror did I finally breathe. Back at the inn, I tore open the envelope with my name. Inside wasn't cash, wasn't stocks. It was a letter. Daniel, it began, in my grandfather's steady handwriting. If you are reading this, you have seen the vault and survived. What I left the others will destroy them because they will drown in greed. What I left you is choice. These documents contain everything. The truth about my empire, the crimes, the enemies. With this, you can expose it all, or you can control it. The power is yours. But remember, power consumes. Do not make the mistakes I made. That is why I chose you, because you are different. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time, I felt something I never thought was possible. My grandfather's faith in me. I looked at the documents scattered on the bed. Names, accounts, evidence that could topple everything my family believed was untouchable. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Maybe James was still out there. Maybe others would come. The danger wasn't over. But one thing was clear. My grandfather's fortune wasn't the real inheritance. The truth was. And now, the world would know.